Hey guys, today's story is one wild trip. What happens when Adolf Hitler wakes up in a future where humanity seems united, discrimination extinct, and the world at peace? Or is it all just an illusion? The air, thick with the metallic tang of ozone and something sweet like blooming circuitry, clawed at his lungs. Adolf Hitler coughed, a ragged, unfamiliar sound, as the blinding white light receded, leaving behind a dizzying kaleidoscope of impossible structures. He was no longer in the damp, reeking bunker, the scent of defeat clinging to the very bricks. Instead, towering spires of crystalline glass pierced a sky alive with silent, gliding vehicles, their forms sleek and alien. A tremor of something akin to awe, a sensation he had long believed extinguished within him, rippled through his rigid frame. This was not death. This was something far stranger, a world spun from dreams or madness, a future he had never dared to imagine, where the very air hummed with a power he could not comprehend. His mind, a fortress of iron will and unyielding conviction, reeled. What sorcery was this? He stumbled forward, his worn uniform feeling absurdly out of place amidst the flowing, iridescent fabrics worn by the figures who now drifted past him, their faces a mosaic of every shade and feature. No one seemed to notice his sudden, impossible appearance. They moved with an effortless grace, their eyes fixed on personal holographic displays that shimmered in the air before them. The cacophony of the past, the shouts, the gunfire, the desperate pleas, was replaced by a soft, melodic hum that resonated from the very ground beneath his feet. He saw no ghettos, no segregated districts, no clear lines of division. People of all complexions, all ancestries, mingled freely, sharing laughter, exchanging data, their interactions devoid of the subtle, venomous undercurrents he had always known. A strange, unsettling calm settled over him. Had they, after all these years, achieved what he had so brutally fought against? Had the world truly become a melting pot, erasing the very distinctions he deemed sacred? A cold knot of apprehension tightened in his gut. This was not the future he had envisioned, not the triumph of his will. But perhaps, he mused, a new order had simply emerged, one he had yet to decipher. The silence of the gliding vehicles, the absence of any overt conflict, was almost deafening in its implications. He felt like a ghost, an anachronism, haunting a world that had moved on without him. Yet still, an inexplicable pull urged him forward to understand this baffling new reality. His first encounter was with a young woman, her skin the color of rich earth, her eyes a startling emerald green. She wore a tunic that shifted hues with her movements, and a small, intricate device pulsed softly at her temple. She paused, noticing his bewildered gaze, and offered a polite, almost curious smile. "Lost, old one?" Her voice was soft, melodic, utterly devoid of the harshness he associated with human interaction. He merely stared, unable to form words. The sheer normalcy of her presence, her lack of fear or judgment, was disarming. He had expected suspicion, perhaps even hostility, but found only an unsettling neutrality. This was a world without the overt hatred he had cultivated, a world where the lines he had drawn in blood seemed to have vanished. He saw children of mixed heritage playing in lush, vertical gardens that climbed the sides of skyscrapers, their laughter echoing with unrestrained joy. Public spaces buzzed with conversations in a multitude of languages, all seamlessly translated by unseen devices. It was a spectacle of unity, a grand, bewildering testament to a future he had fought to prevent. He found himself drawn to a public forum, a vast, open-air amphitheater where holographic projections of historical events flickered across the sky. A young man, his face earnest and passionate, was lecturing on the era of divides, a period he described with a detached, almost clinical horror. The lecturer spoke of nationalism, of racial purity, of the senseless wars that had ravaged the planet. Hitler listened, a strange mix of pride and revulsion churning within him. They spoke of his era as a dark chapter, a time of ignorance and barbarism. Yet, the very fact that they spoke of it openly, that they seemed to have moved beyond it, was a bitter pill to swallow. "We have learned," the lecturer proclaimed, his voice resonating through the plaza, "that our strength lies not in our differences, but in our shared humanity. The old prejudices, the ancient hatreds have been purged. We are one now." A wave of applause rippled through the diverse crowd. Hitler felt the flicker of something he hadn't felt in decades: confusion. Had his life's work been utterly meaningless? Had humanity truly transcended its base instincts? He approached a small kiosk where a woman with silver hair and eyes that held the wisdom of centuries offered him a nutrient paste. "For your journey, elder," she said, her voice kind. He took it, his hand trembling slightly. He saw no signs of the inferior races he had sought to eradicate. They were all here, thriving, seemingly equal. This was a world of seamless integration, of effortless coexistence. He observed carefully, searching for the telltale signs, the subtle cues of underlying prejudice. But there were none. Or so it seemed. He spent days, then weeks, wandering the gleaming cities, observing, listening. He learned about the global consensus, a governing body that had replaced nations, and the universal code of conduct, which enshrined equality and mutual respect. He saw no poverty, no hunger, no overt conflict. The advancements were breathtaking. Personal flight pods zipped through the air, medical nanobots healed injuries in moments, and clean energy flowed freely from fusion reactors. He saw no overt signs of the weakness he had so despised. The people were healthy, well-fed, and seemingly content. He began to believe, against his deepest convictions, that humanity had indeed evolved beyond its primitive urges. A grudging respect, tinged with a profound sense of irrelevance, began to form within him. Perhaps, he thought, his struggle, his sacrifice, had somehow, inadvertently, paved the way for this grand, unified future. A twisted sense of validation, almost perverse, began to take root. One evening, he found himself in a quiet, holographic library, browsing through historical archives. He stumbled upon a section dedicated to the Great Purge of Prejudice, a global initiative from the mid-21st century that claimed to have eradicated all forms of discrimination. It detailed public re-education programs, psychological conditioning, and severe penalties for any act of bigotry. He scoffed. Such things could not truly change the human heart. Yet, the evidence around him seemed to contradict his cynicism. He saw no overt signs of the weakness he had so despised. The people were healthy, well-fed, and seemingly content. He began to believe, against his deepest convictions, that humanity had indeed evolved beyond its primitive urges. A grudging respect, tinged with a profound sense of irrelevance, began to form within him. Perhaps, he thought, his struggle, his sacrifice had somehow, inadvertently, paved the way for this grand, unified future. A twisted sense of validation, almost perverse, began to take root. Then, he met Alara. She was a young archivist, her face framed by fiery red hair, her eyes sharp and observant. She was fascinated by the era of divides, a period she studied with an almost academic zeal. He found himself drawn to her, not by attraction, but by a shared intellectual curiosity, albeit from vastly different perspectives. He, the architect of that era, and she, its meticulous chronicler. He began to engage her in conversation, subtly probing, testing the limits of this supposed new harmony. "Tell me, Alara," he asked one day, his voice carefully modulated, "do you truly believe that all the old distinctions, the ancient loyalties, have vanished, that blood and heritage hold no sway?" Alara paused, her brow furrowing slightly. "Officially, yes, Elder. We are all global citizens now. Our ancestry is merely a footnote in our personal data streams. It holds no bearing on our opportunities or our worth." But then, she hesitated. "However," she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "there are whispers. Subtleties, the unspoken biases, as some call them. You see it in the allocation of certain privilege modules in the urban sectors, or the subtle weighting in algorithmic job placements. It is never overt, never stated. But it exists." A spark ignited in Hitler's eyes. This was it, the crack in the facade. "Explain," he demanded, his voice betraying a hint of his old intensity. Alara looked around as if fearing unseen ears. "It is not racism, not in the old sense," she clarified, "but a new form of social stratification. Based on compatibility scores, historical contribution indexes, genetic predispositions to certain skill sets. It is all cloaked in scientific jargon, in the language of efficiency and progress. But the outcome is the same. Certain groups, subtly, imperceptibly, find themselves at the top, while others, just as subtly, remain at the bottom." She spoke of the enlightened lineages, families whose genetic markers were deemed optimal for leadership or innovation, and who subtly received preferential treatment in education and resource allocation. She spoke of the legacy communities, groups who had historically suffered and who, despite all the rhetoric of equality, still found themselves struggling to break free from systemic disadvantages, often channeled through complex algorithms that seemed neutral on the surface. "It is not about race or creed anymore," Alara explained, a note of weariness in her voice, "but about data compatibility, about optimal societal integration. Yet, when you peel back the layers, the patterns are disturbingly familiar. The same groups, by and large, are still at the top. The same groups are still struggling. It is just hidden behind layers of code and statistical analysis." Hitler listened, a slow, chilling smile spreading across his face. "So," he murmured, his voice laced with a dark satisfaction, "they have not changed. They have merely become more cowardly. They lack the conviction to openly declare their superiority, to fight for their place. They hide behind algorithms and compatibility scores. This is not progress, Alara. This is weakness. This is a society too afraid to acknowledge its own nature." Alara flinched, disturbed by the intensity in his eyes. "It is different, Elder," she insisted. "There is no hatred, no violence. It is a quiet, systemic bias, not an overt one." "A quiet bias," Hitler scoffed, "is merely a fear of truth. A fear of acknowledging the natural order. Your global consensuses is a grand deception, a monument to hypocrisy." He began to see the world through a new lens. The seamless integration, the harmonious mingling, now appeared as a thin veneer. He observed the subtle shifts in body language when certain individuals interacted, the almost imperceptible hesitations, the nuanced inflections in voice that betrayed underlying assumptions. He saw the enlightened lineages subtly dominate the most prestigious scientific and artistic fields, their children effortlessly gliding into positions of power, while the legacy communities disproportionately occupied the service sectors, their advancements often capped by invisible ceilings. It was not the overt, brutal racism he had championed, but a more insidious, pervasive form of discrimination, woven into the very fabric of society. Masked by the rhetoric of meritocracy and data-driven efficiency, he began to test his theory. He would approach individuals from different compatibility scores, posing seemingly innocuous questions about their background, their opportunities, their aspirations. He noted the subtle differences in their responses, the almost imperceptible pride in some, the quiet resignation in others. He saw the ways certain legacy community members would instinctively defer to those from enlightened lineages, a deference born not of fear, but of generations of subtle conditioning. This was not the overt, brutal racism he had championed, but a more insidious, pervasive form of discrimination, woven into the very fabric of society, masked by the rhetoric of meritocracy and data-driven efficiency. He found himself drawn to the undercurrents, a clandestine network of historians and social scientists who secretly documented these hidden biases. They met in encrypted virtual spaces, sharing data, analyzing trends, trying to expose the truth. He joined their discussions, initially as an observer, then as a participant, his insights into the mechanics of prejudice, albeit from a twisted perspective, proving disturbingly valuable. They saw him as a relic, a historical curiosity, unaware of his true identity. He, in turn, saw them as naive, well-meaning fools who sought to dismantle a system. That was, in his view, merely a more sophisticated manifestation of the natural order. One of the leaders of the undercurrents was a man named Kale, a brilliant but disillusioned data scientist from an enlightened lineage who had grown disgusted by the subtle injustices he witnessed. Kale believed that by exposing the algorithms, they could dismantle the system. Hitler, however, saw it differently. "You seek to dismantle what is inherent," he told Kale during one of their encrypted exchanges. "Humanity will always seek to elevate some and subjugate others. It is merely a question of how openly they admit it." Kale was perplexed by the elder's cynical wisdom, mistaking it for profound historical insight. "But the hatred, the violence that is gone," Kale argued. "Is it," Hitler countered, a chilling glint in his eyes, "or is it merely cloaked in politeness, in data points, and the illusion of choice? Is it not more cowardly to pretend equality while perpetuating inequality through hidden means?" Ilara, meanwhile, grew increasingly uneasy with the elder's presence. There was a darkness about him, a chilling certainty that resonated with the very prejudices she sought to expose. She began to delve deeper into his historical data stream, cross-referencing his mannerisms, his philosophical leanings, with known historical figures. The more she researched, the more a horrifying truth began to dawn on her. The elder's insights were too precise, his understanding of historical prejudice too intimate. The chilling realization that she was interacting with Adolf Hitler, the architect of the greatest atrocities, sent a jolt of terror through her. She confronted him, her voice trembling. "Who are you truly?" she demanded. He merely smiled, a cold, knowing smile that sent shivers down her spine. "I am a ghost, Ilara, a ghost of the past, come to witness the future. And what I have seen confirms my deepest convictions. Humanity has not changed. It has merely perfected the art of self-deception." Ilara, horrified, tried to warn Kale and the undercurrents, but Hitler, anticipating her move, had already begun to subtly manipulate the network. He fed them data that, while seemingly exposing the hidden biases, also subtly reinforced the idea of inherent differences, of unchangeable human nature. He sowed seeds of distrust, twisting their noble intentions to serve his own dark philosophy. The undercurrents, unknowingly, became a tool for his twisted agenda. They began to publish their findings, exposing the enlightened lineages and the legacy communities, but in a way that, instead of fostering unity, inadvertently highlighted the perceived natural divisions. The public, initially shocked, slowly began to internalize these distinctions, not as systemic flaws to be corrected, but as inherent realities. The subtle biases, once hidden, began to surface, emboldened by the scientific data presented by the undercurrents. The carefully constructed facade of unity began to crack. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into open discussions, and the polite veneer of coexistence started to fray. The global consensus, initially dismissive of the undercurrents, suddenly found itself facing a crisis. The data, though manipulated by Hitler, was undeniably real, revealing the hidden stratification that had festered beneath the surface. Panic rippled through the populace as the illusion of perfect equality shattered. Old anxieties, long suppressed, began to resurface. The enlightened lineages felt unjustly targeted, their subtle privileges now exposed. The legacy communities felt a renewed sense of betrayal, their hopes for true equality dashed. The very fabric of society, once so seamlessly woven, began to unravel. Hitler watched, a grim satisfaction settling in his heart. This was not the overt, brutal conflict he had engineered in his time, but a slow, insidious unraveling, a quiet triumph of his dark philosophy. He had not needed armies or propaganda machines. He had merely needed to expose the truth, to reveal the cowardice of a society that refused to acknowledge its own inherent divisions. The global consensus scrambled to contain the damage, issuing statements, launching new re-education programs, but it was too late. The seeds of doubt had been sown, nurtured by the very data meant to liberate. Alara, witnessing the chaos she had inadvertently helped unleash, felt a profound despair. She saw the subtle shifts in behavior, the re-emergence of veiled contempt, the quiet segregation in public spaces. The future she had believed in, the future of true equality, was crumbling before her eyes. She confronted Hitler one last time, her voice raw with anguish. "You have destroyed everything," she cried, "everything we built." He merely shrugged, his eyes cold and unwavering. "I destroyed nothing, child. I merely revealed what was already there. Your society was built on a lie, a cowardly refusal to face the truth of human nature. You sought to erase distinctions, but distinctions are inherent. You merely hid them, and in doing so, made them fester." The global consensus, in a desperate attempt to restore order, initiated a massive data purge, attempting to erase the revelations of the undercurrents. But the knowledge, once unleashed, could not be contained. The subtle divisions, once exposed, began to solidify. People, no longer able to pretend, began to gravitate towards their perceived kind. Subtly, quietly, but undeniably. The world did not erupt in war, not in the old sense. Instead, it fractured into 1,000 silent schisms, a mosaic of polite but distinct communities, each wary of the other, each clinging to its own perceived identity. The advancements continued, the cities still gleamed, but the soul of humanity, the promise of true unity, had been irrevocably scarred. Hitler, a ghost in a future he had both loathed and, in a twisted way, understood, vanished as silently as he had arrived. His mission, in his own dark estimation, was complete. The world, for all its technological marvels, had merely found a more sophisticated way to perpetuate the very divisions he had championed. The future, it seemed, was not so different after all. It had merely learned to hide its true face. And so, the world that once claimed to have conquered hate found itself undone by the truth it refused to face. From this chilling tale, we learn, even the most advanced societies can crumble if they bury their flaws beneath polished surfaces. History doesn't always repeat, sometimes it just reboots with better PR.